You're listening to the A Lot of Like podcast, a podcast created for the overwhelmed entrepreneur to feel safe, seen, and supported through conversations around the not so common topics in business. My name is Miranda Joyner, a former radio personality turned podcaster. I'm a brand consultant, author, and speaker, and the co founder of Succeed and Elevate, an organization dedicated to helping small business owners overcome burnout. In this podcast, we have candid conversations about the everyday struggles that entrepreneurs face and the real no fluff solutions to help us overcome them. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to A Lot Alike, the podcast where entrepreneurs can connect. My name is Miranda Joyner, and I am your guide slash host, and I'm excited to be back with you for another episode. On today's episode, we are talking about pivoting. I know it's a very trendy word in the business world and community in the startup land. And it's also a trendy word, whether you believe it or not, in your own personal lives. Because all we do on a regular basis is pivot. But when it comes to business, we get really fearful and scared to do it. And so today we're going to unpack what that looks like, some of the fears around pivots. I want to talk to you about some of the ways to recognize when it's probably time to pivot and hopefully give you some comfort and ease to make you feel safe, seen, and supported about shifting in your business world or maybe just in your life in general. If you're loving this podcast, hopefully you can share it with a friend. Before I get into the conversation around pivoting, I want to talk about my earrings, right? Uh, and I wore this velour top. It's a velour jumper. I know you can't see my pants, but they're the same exact as this top, feeling a little retro. And so, in light of that, I put on my mom's earrings. And so, for those of you who don't know me personally or don't follow me on social media, my mom passed away in 2015. And so sometimes I have little ways of keeping her near and dear to me. And I just wanted to say her name, which is Maggie Joyner, and honor her in this episode as I wear her earrings are from the 80s, right? Because honestly, when I think about pivoting, I think about my mom. I think about coming up in a single parent home with my mother and my grandmother and all of the ways in which she had to pivot in her life. I watched my mom adjust on so many levels in so many ways, and I feel like because of that, it made me better qualified as an adult to adjust to all the curveballs that life can throw at you, whether they're good or bad. So, in this episode, I want to subtly honor my mom as we talk about pivoting, which is so hard for people to do. So, let's get right into this episode. One of the things that I think is important before we get to defining what pivoting is I want to frame this in purpose. Because I think a lot of times when we think about pivoting, whether it's in our lives personally or in the work that we do, we tend to leave purpose out of the conversation. We don't talk about the fact that pivoting should be completely influenced by our final destination of how we show up in this world. Because whether you believe it or not, most of us in this world, our lives are centered around the work we do. We like to think it's family, and I think family is extremely important to most of us. But what dictates the way that we move through life is our beliefs. It's who you are, what you believe, and what you do in this world. And most of that is centered around the work and how we show up. Now, if we unpack what we do in work and think about what should be the most important thing about the work we do, if we could, I think most of us would do work that made us feel purposeful, that made us feel like we had a bigger cause or a bigger mission or a bigger purpose in this life outside of just making money. If money wasn't an issue and we didn't have to make money, you want to ask yourself, what is the work that I would do because I love doing it? And most of us would like to be doing that type of work, whether we do it or not. A lot of times, most of us are not in a career that we enjoy. And some of us leave careers that we don't enjoy and don't feel fulfilled in to pursue something that makes us feel more fulfilled. So, when you're thinking about the times in your life where you pivot, there are multiple reasons where I'm going to get to where we pivot. But I want to frame this and I want you to start thinking about what is the bigger picture for me and how I show up in this world. What do I feel like is my purpose in this life? What do I feel like is the thing that I want to leave as an impact on this world? What is my legacy? That's a very trendy thing for people to say. What is the thing that I want to do or could do or would do if money wasn't an issue? People ask you those type of questions to try to get to the bottom of what you might be passionate about or what you might feel like your bigger purpose is in life. I'm going to share with you in this podcast some questions that I asked myself to help me get to purpose and some things that I looked at in my own life to help me to navigate to a space that I felt like I was doing a work that was more fulfilling. So, asking yourself those questions, one, I think is a great start to say, who are you? Who are you as a person, a human being? What is it that you believe in this world? Like, what is the most important thing to you in this world? Like, when you strip away all of the challenges, the stress, the barriers, the self sabotaging ways that we tend to have, what is it that you actually deem as to be the most important thing in your life? And then what do you do in this world? What is that thing that you do that you feel like is of great value? To think about that as we move into thinking about pivoting in our space. And maybe you're a person that has never thought about pivoting. And as you're answering those questions, you're thinking, man, I'm totally fine. And as we start to unpack this conversation, you might start to question whether it is time for a pivot. Or you might be someone that's saying, I know for a fact that I am unfulfilled where I am and it's time for a shift, but I'm terrified, Miranda, of pivoting. Or you might be a person like me that is dead smack in the middle of a pivot and is still a little shaky about how this transition is supposed to look and work and feel. And we're going to talk through that today. Just me and you and me, nobody else. Let's just talk it out, throw some spaghetti on the wall. I'm not saying I'm right about everything, but I think I know a little bit based on some of the experiences I've had. And I'm very, very open to your feedback and thoughts about what we share today. So let's get into it. One of the things I think when I think about pivoting and change, I go back to our childhood and I think about all the moments in my life where I have shifted from one aspect of my life to the other. And I think about all the different reasons that I've had to shift. But I can't help but think about my son. And I know I don't look old enough to have an 18-year-old, but I do. So I have a son that just recently graduated from high school. And one of the things when he graduated that I remember thinking as he was approaching this monumental time in his life, a time that he won't forget, I remember thinking that I didn't want him to have the pressures that I remember having as a kid to hurry up and pick a career that I was going to be committed to for the rest of my life. And I wasn't really sure what that was. I had a feeling, but I wasn't one of those people that just off the cuff knew their passion. And believe it or not, statistically speaking, most people don't at an early age know what their passion is. There's a percentage of people that come out knowing exactly what they want to do. But on a larger scale, about 7 to 8 out of 10 people are not sure and unsure about what their passion is, what they were supposed to be doing. And so, knowing this about my son when he was graduating, I was determined to have very honest, candid conversations with him instead of pressuring him into the societal pressures of quickly identifying at 18 what you want to do with yourself for the rest of your life. And this is the conversation that I used to have with him is that there are people in their 20s, there are people in their 30s, including your mother, and even people in their 40s and 50s that realize that they've gone their entire lives doing something that they did not enjoy, did not want to do. And if they could go back, they would choose something else because they just picked a career based on pressure. And some people never pivot and they stick with it. And some people shift and pivot into something else and take that risk and that chance and step out on faith and fear against all odds, against the pressure of people telling them that they're crazy. And they make that turn. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes it's easy. And sometimes it's challenging for people. And sometimes it's in between. But that's the beauty of life is that either way, it's a space where you can figure it out, right? And you just don't. You never know. And so you have to ask yourself, how do you want to spend your life? Either getting to that age and realizing you wish you could have gone back to a moment and done it, or either getting to that age and being glad that you took a chance to shift when you did, even if it didn't turn out picture perfect. So I told my son, I think you should take a beat and take a gap year. And I don't think it's the most popular opinion to tell your kid coming out of high school to take a gap year and slow down. But my thought was after the years he's had with COVID, um, the shifts he's had to make in high school, the unpredictable times that we've faced over the last couple of years, I just felt like he deserved a break, especially because he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life as far as career goes. And I felt like it was my job to let him know that that's okay. It's totally fine that you're not sure because majority of the people your age have no clue what they want to do with their lives. People in their 20s are working and have no clue what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So you're in good company. And so he took a semester off and decided that he wanted to not take a year, but the semester was cool. And he's going to be starting school up in the spring. And that's the plan. And here's the thing about it though, even if in the spring something goes left and he decides to not or he doesn't, I think that's okay too, right? This life is just about figuring it out and adjusting to the things that come your way. So now that I've ranted on about my son and put this in perspective about feeling through life and being okay with the decisions and not having to be perfect, let's get into this talk about pivoting and seeing where you are in your life. So, what is pivoting exactly? Like, if we had to break it down and define it in one sentence, I would say that pivoting is changing in a strategy, like changing the strategy of your life, some life changing thing that you're doing without changing your overall vision, the bigger picture of what you want to do, AKA the purpose. What impact do you want to have on this world? Do you feel like you should have on this world? And how do you wanna make people feel in life? Because ultimately, I think our goals are to be of service to each other, and in turn, in the balance of that, not the neglecting of ourselves, but in the balance of that, we service ourselves, right? There's that dual balance of how do you show up for people and then still find time to show up for yourself. And I'm also a big advocate of this idea that you can't be a conduit of something without it getting all over you. So if you need love or you're showing up in love and service to others, then you should be also giving that same amount of love and service to yourself because it's all over you. And so you want to be a reflection of the work that you do with others to yourself because that's the balance, right? So, this is what pivot is it is a major change in your life, a shift in your strategy or how you show up your plans without changing the overall bigger picture. Now, let me break this down into like business terms. You want to think about the purpose as being your destination. And then, however you get there is going to look different. We're going to take different routes to the same destination. Sometimes you might get to a street and the detour sign is up telling you that, hey, you can't come down this road. You got to go another way, AKA rejection or a no or a closed door or a missed opportunity. And you can take another route, another road. You can jump on the highway, on the interstate, make a U turn, loop back around and come around. Such is life when we're moving through our lives, when we're moving through work, when we're moving through relationships, that there are multiple ways to get to the destination. And I think about in the business world and in terms, I use Chick-fil-A and Nike often because their vision statements don't really align with what you would think that they would be based on the type of companies they are. So I mentioned Chick-fil-A before in a previous podcast, but in the space of Chick-fil-A, their bigger mission is to glorify God by having a positive influence on everybody that encounters Chick-fil-A. And, when you think about the fact that they serve chicken, you know, you have to say, okay, that's the bigger purpose. And the way that they went about getting to that final destination of having a positive influence on people is through a way of a fast food restaurant. And they do it in a way of showing up and being an efficient and fast and friendly restaurant. And then you think about Nike, their bigger vision for their company is to expand human potential, right? To do everything in their power to expand human potential. And they do that by way of their mission through connecting to athletes and pushing athletes to be their best, right? So that is the road in which they took. That is the pivot in which they took. And so as you think about the career that you're in or what you're doing, or maybe a moment in your life where you're having to, and it's not always just career centered. Sometimes it's a move. Sometimes it's a pregnancy result, a test result, or even any test result, right? Maybe something came up with your health and you had to pivot the way that you show up in life. Maybe something came up and there was a death in your family, and so the structure of your life completely changed. I just want to encourage you to know that no matter what it is, that it's something that you can handle. And I want you to think about ways that you are addressing those things. How are you easing into it? How are you being open to allowing it to happen and trusting yourself and your intuition that you can get the job done, or that you can show up in your best space in this pivot, that the destination doesn't have to change because the road to that destination changed. I really wanted to start this out and shape this in the context of business, but I keep lingering back into day-to-day life things, but just stick with me. It's all relevant, and honestly, it all aligns. It all aligns because ultimately how you do that saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. Typically the principles that apply in business, you can take those principles out and put them in your everyday lives, right? You can take those principles out and put them in your one-on-one relationships, right? So really think about how these principles and these things that we're discussing, if it hits for you in business, when I'm talking about it, let it resonate there. If it hits for you in your personal life, let it resonate there. If it hits for you in the relationship space, let it resonate there. Just know I'm going to jump between all three. Okay. One, two, three. So let's talk about some fears that come up, because I want to address the fears before I get into the ways to recognize when it might be time to pivot or when a pivot might be happening in your life. I want to talk about fears because more often than not, when I talk about anything like solutions or evolving or moving forward, or an audacious idea or plan that I have, more often than not from people, I'll get resistance by way of people identifying hypothetical what ifs, or people talking about the things that could go wrong, or the resistance that we might get in a space. And I often find myself wondering, why is it that we respond with these things off the cuff, like instantly, instinctively, instead of getting on board with things when it's a good idea, or when we're moving in a space that might feel unfamiliar or that might make us uncomfortable. And I think a lot of that is wrapped up in fear. I remember Brene Brown had made the statement one time in something I was listening to, maybe it was an audiobook or a podcast. Anyway, she said that when you ask someone about love, they'll tell you about heartache. And when you ask them about joy, they'll tell you about a time where pain entered into their lives. And I think it's so interesting that by nature we default to those things instead of embracing what could be freeing, um, progressive. I think it's a really intriguing thing. I'm not going to get into the psychological part of it, but one of the things that I do know is that fear often dictates a lot of how we move. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions about fear and around fear. And fear can be good and bad because we're given this feeling, this thing as a protective, right? As a way to tell us that something is coming, right? That either something good or something bad is coming our way. And instinctively, fear protects us because when we're in a scary or unsafe place, fear kicks in to heighten our senses, keep us on alert so that we can move and be instinctive, fight or flight, right? Fight or flight is very necessary to help us survive in certain instances. And then there's the fear that shuts us down when something good is coming. And we have to be able to recognize when it is a good time to shift into um, being guarded and fleeing, or leaning in because there is something good pushing past. And I don't think it's either or, I think it's and that both of those can exist, right? So it's not that we only have a certain type of fear. I think fear has a dual role in our lives. And it's our job to be able to recognize when we lean in and when we don't. Anyway, off the fear bandwagon because this podcast is not about fear. I want to talk about the fears that come up when it comes to pivoting. I think just like most fears in our lives, some of these fears are going to sound very familiar because, again, you can apply these to any part of your lives, right? I think one of the not so surprising first fears that comes up when it comes to pivoting and being able to do that is fear of failure. We are extremely fearful of looking like we don't know what we're talking about, being wrong, doing what seems like a thing that we should not have done or be doing when the reality is that we're all out here failing and figuring things out. That's just the nature of who we are as human beings, and failure is just a part of existing. And if it isn't taking us completely out of this world, then it's okay to fail. Like it's like that saying when you're driving with someone in the car and they're driving a little reckless and you're over there clenching the seat, hitting the imaginary brake with your foot, and they look at you and go, "But did you die? Are you all right?" So it's the same way with fear of failure. To understand that it teaches us lessons. It shows us if we allow it. It shows us the detours that we should take. The roads is basically saying, "Not this way, go another way." So we can look at failure in certain instances as a lesson learned or as a detour sign to tell us, "Nope, not this way, go another way." The second fear that I think comes up when it comes to pivoting is what people think of you. If we could fail in private, I don't think that we would care about failing. If we weren't worried about the opinions of others, and most of the time these opinions come from people who are not fulfilled in their lives or insecure or projecting their own insecurities onto us, then we would move forward without any thought. So the second one is fear of what people think about us. And the reality is that more people are rooting for us most of the time than are against us. And for whatever reason, psychologically, we tend to zoom in on the negative things, no matter how small and minor they are. But you have to train yourself to refocus and regroup and redirect your thoughts back to the bigger picture that most people are in your corner. And then the last one is our identity is so wrapped up into our career choices that when we feel like we're pivoting from a thing that we have built our entire lives around, that almost feels like it's challenging who we feel like we are as a person. When you ask most people who they are, they're going to give you a title that is hard associated with the work that they do. Or they're going to tell you they're a mother or a wife or a husband, or they're going to name a title that in reality, if the title didn't exist, they wouldn't stop existing. So that title isn't really completely who they are, but we identify with religion, with, political positions like titles and so forth. And so at the end of the day, really thinking about and repurposing or defining who you are as a person apart from titles, I think is a very helpful thing to get into the practice of as you think about easing into pivoting, right? So, who are you specifically? Get deeper. Who are you? If you didn't have kids and you weren't a mother or a father, would you cease to exist? You wouldn't. If religion wasn't a thing, then would you cease to exist? You wouldn't. If you didn't have the job you had, would you cease to exist? You wouldn't. And so, really think about how hard you might be identifying your existence with a job title or a career. It's really helpful when it comes to being able to ease into pivoting. All right. So, now that we've identified some fears and been able to recognize that, let's talk about the reasons that people pivot and some of the ways that we can recognize when it is time to pivot in your space. A lot of times, I think one of the main, if I had to think of the biggest reason, I want to start at the biggest and then I'm gonna go down because why flip it? I think the biggest reason that most people shift into purpose and pivot is because people are in a job or a space where they feel completely unfulfilled. They feel like they are missing their calling. They don't feel like they are living in purpose. They don't feel like what they're doing is impactful. And so because of that, people get restless in their jobs. They start to be irritated by little things and people. They come home maybe and sometimes they feel restless. They feel like what they're doing doesn't matter, doesn't count, that they're not making the impact in this world that they want to. And so they'll go out and try to do other things to make up for that lack of fulfillment in a job. But this is, I think, one of the bigger signs for people to think about, oh, it might be time for me to pivot into something else. But I think familiarity, um, security, which I totally understand, been there, done that, can be things that will keep you in a space or with a job that you need. And maybe you need the insurance. Maybe you need the income for sure. Maybe your life situation doesn't allow you to pivot. Totally understandable. If that's the case, then you do what works for you. But in the instance where you feel like there are ways for you to pivot and that it's possible for you to pivot and still be fulfilled and living the life that you want to, I think there is a chance that uh, is worth taking. It's a chance worth taking. It's a risk worth taking. And majority of the times, most people, I would imagine, feel fulfilled when they do, even if the money doesn't match, even if some of the things you were comfortable with and used to didn't match. I'm gonna tell you right now, for me, the stress that I was feeling working for somebody else, it's no comparison to the stress that I have working for myself. And I don't mean like it's more stressful working for myself. I mean, either way, I was going to be stressing. I feel better stressing about my own life and destiny than I did stressing over somebody else's job that had me in a pigeonhole. And I want to be very clear, working as a solopreneur or an entrepreneur or a small business owner is not for everybody. It's not a job for everybody. Being at a 9 to 5 is not a job that is for everybody. Working in corporate America is not a job that is for everybody. Working in the service industry is not a job that is for everybody. So the reality is that we're such a diverse group of human beings that everybody's meant to fit where they're meant to fit, and one is not better than the other. It's just knowing what your role is, what works for you and your personality, okay? So seeking purpose, I think, is one of the first things. Feeling unfulfilled in your job is the first sign that it might be time to pivot. Another one is something altered in your life. Maybe, like I said earlier, there was a death, or maybe there was a job change. Maybe you got laid off. Maybe there was a shift in management, and you were like, hey, this is more stressful to me in my life than anything else. I think it's time for me to do something else. Maybe you have outgrown a space or a situation and you feel that. Maybe you've outgrown a city. Maybe you feel like you're in a hamster wheel, just you know, going through the motions, okay? It might be time for a pivot if you're feeling complacent, if you're feeling like there is no growth, that you can't move and expand, but your body is desiring growth and expansion. It might be time for you to pivot. And then the last one is that if you discover that there is a demand on you, your gift, or your talent. And what I mean by that is that you keep hearing over and over again people saying or people coming to you overwhelmingly to get something from you in service or in product that is not your main job. It might be time for you to shift if more people are coming to you, moving full steam ahead, saying, hey, can you give us more of this thing? Or can you give us this service more? We're willing to pay you to be in this space. Then you might want to consider what a slow transition pivot would look like from your space to this space, especially if that thing that they're asking for is fulfilling to you in your life. Okay. All right. So those are some ways to be able to recognize pivot. I think about currently where I am with my business and with my job as an entrepreneur. For those of you that don't know my story, I quit my job in my late 30s and I left to work for myself as a full-time brand consultant. In the beginning, I was calling myself a branding coach. And I asked myself three questions when I shifted into this space. I had gotten to a point where the jobs that I was working for just weren't cutting it for me. They were becoming more and more difficult, and I honestly felt like God, the universe, just everything was pushing me to a place of, hey, hey, girl, try this on your own. Okay, see how this works for yourself. And I decided after I had a really bad encounter with some leadership that had shifted at the job I was at. I was working at as a cashier. And honestly, this job was a transition job between me being in a at a PR position. I was a public relations specialist for an organization that really hired me to not be the thing they wanted me to be. And it was a very toxic environment. And so I quit there and I was trying to figure out what my next move was, and I went to work for an old boss of mine as a favor to him, but also a favor to my income as a cashier at a car dealership. And I was working in the service department as the cashier, and it was a transition job for me. And I was trying to, as I was in there, think about what my next move career wise was going to be. And there was a management change, and the new manager was just really rude and abrasive and he just wasn't kind to a certain group of people. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to take a chance on myself. And for me, that was the moment that it was a pivot for me. It was like, okay, I got to pivot into something else. And so I shifted and I started working as a brand consultant as and I started working with small business owners because at the time I was managing a person in entertainment and I had helped them build their career and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed helping to watch an idea go from a thought creation to watching it come to life, right? From the thought process to actual birth. It really fueled me to be able to help somebody build in that way. And so I want to do this for more people. And as I started doing this work, I realized that, I really am good at this. I enjoy it. But I asked myself these three questions before I really jumped into it. I asked myself, what do I love doing? What do I do well? And what do people come to me for? And in the midst of that, I was able to shift into helping people build their careers because outside of, um, working with that one particular person, I was helping other people too on the side, like in small pockets, like advising them, giving them counseling or advice about what I felt like they should do because of my background and some of the things that I had done. So, anyway, I started doing this work and fast forward to the last couple of years post COVID, I feel like right now I am pivoting into a space of doing the same work for people, but in a different realm. And I think this is the first time that I am really tapping into what I have noticed in my own life as patterns. I had to go back to those three questions and really ask myself, not just on a what I do level, what do I do well and what do people come to me for? I had to ask an internal question of in the what is my purpose and why? What do people come to me for? What are the patterns in my life that I show up for with people? And I realized that ultimately what I do is I help people to feel safe, seen, and supported so that they can be okay with where they are without shame in life in order to grow from that space. Overwhelmingly, people come to me and tell me that they feel safe. They feel like they can be themselves. They feel like even when people first meet me, I often hear, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but you just make me feel like you're not going to judge me or like overwhelmingly. People open up and I'll hear people often say, I've never told anyone this before, or this is the first time I've shared this my entire life. And I had to look at the patterns that were happening in my life and realize, oh, Miranda, this is your destination. Like, this is your destination. This is your purpose. How do you want to get to this space? And what I realized is that I had been picking when I first leaned into entrepreneurship, I leaned into something that I love doing, which was working with business owners and creatives with their branding and their marketing because I love story. I loved telling story and helping people with branding and how they showed up, and I was good at it. So I picked that avenue to get to working with people to help them feel safe, seen, and supported in this space. Let me tell you how much my purpose was gleaming through the work that I was doing. I started being a brand consultant and I was just hard pressed ready to help people with marketing and branding. But what was happening when I was sitting down with my clients was in the very first session, I kept unintentionally because I didn't know. What I'm telling you now, this revelation had not come to me yet because I was figuring it out. But in the beginning, our sessions, I kept grounding people in purpose. I kept helping people connect to purpose. I would listen to their stories. I would ask intrusive questions or like probing questions about who they were and why they do the work that they did. Because for me, what I thought I was doing was helping them have a more solid, honest story about what they do to tie into their brand. And what I realized in the first session was I kept connecting people to purpose. And so I created my sessions around identifying purpose and then getting to the meat of how do you tell this story? What is your elevator pitch? What is your mission statement? That would be like the second session. And then we would get to social media. But in the beginning, people kept defining and describing the first session as if it was the session that they didn't know they needed. People would say that this first session feels like therapy. And yeah, I realized that purpose was very important. People would be in tears in the first session. And I didn't plan this, it just happened that way. That was my purpose shining through the work that I was doing without me even knowing it because people were getting in front of me and feeling like this was the first time that they could become undone. They were overwhelmed with their business, with the work that they were doing. And I was holding a space for them that would allow them to open up in a way that most people who run their own business didn't have the opportunity to do. And now that I look back on it, I recognize that this was my purpose gleaming through. And I was using marketing and branding as a way to hold space for these people. So now at this point where I am in the pivot to get to the bigger picture and point is that I'm fully leaning into that space that I hold for people and what that looks like with this pivot. I'm really excited as you all get to watch me in real time figure out this pivot from hard marketing and branding, which I still will do because it's a part of what I love to do, but pivoting into this new space of holding space for people to help them feel safe, seen, and supported so that they can grow from that place in the different areas that I'm moving into as I shift my own personal brand. So hopefully you hearing how I one was able to identify it for myself and then taking into consideration all things we talked about, you're able to reflect on your own and ask yourself these questions. What do you love doing? What do you do well? And what do people come to you for? To pay attention to these patterns in your life to see how they show up for you. And maybe somewhere in there you can find purpose and think about how some pivots might be happening currently in your life, needing to happen, or that maybe should happen in the future. And then ask yourself, how do you want to spend the rest of your life? Which I think I said that earlier, and I think that's a very important question to ask yourself. How do you want to spend the rest of your life? Here are some examples of some companies that have pivoted. I want to give you that, and then I want to talk about some takeaways from this and give you a book reference, as I always love to do at the end of this. So, here's some examples of some companies that have pivoted that you might think, oh, this company has always done that. And this is what they've always been known for, right? And wrong. Okay. So, one of a company that I could think about that was a pivot company was Groupon. Groupon. Groupon started out as a company called The Point, and their whole mission was to help people with petitions. And it was basically to get so many people to get on a petition to that would cause a tipping point. That was kind of the idea of it. It was like it was a company called The Point, and it was to get people to a tipping point when it came to gathering information and names for a petition in case they wanted to go petition a thing at City Hall or against, some type of unjust thing that was happening. That didn't last. And so they shifted to Groupon because it didn't work out the way that they thought. Another one was very popular here because most of us have this is Netflix. It shifted from, and I think we all kind of know this story. It shifted from a DVD rentals and streaming to DVDs and rentals to streaming. Okay, to a streaming service that we all are struggling to hold on to and fight with them to let us continue to share passwords. Okay. And then there was Slack. Slack is a company that shifted from the focus of games, because Slack used to be about games, and now Slack is about team communication and team building. It is an app to help you to communicate with your team more effectively and assign them different things and to organize different projects that you're doing with teams. Instagram shifted from being focused on a location based check in app to photo sharing. They found that during the first development of the app, where they were having people to check in, that you could also, there was a feature where you could share photos, and the photo feature became so popular that they realized, oh, snap, there is a pivot that needs to happen here. Right. Okay. And then the last one I'll share is a very kid friendly. This might be a little nostalgic for you. Okay. All right. Those of you that might have been born in the 80s, okay, maybe the 70s too, but the 80s for sure, is Play Doh. Play Doh shifted from a wall cleaner to your favorite childhood ooey gooey toy. Play Doh started out as a wall cleaner. Okay. And I think it's very important to pay attention to the patterns in your life and the things in your life to help you to be able to identify when it's time to shift. For me, one of the bigger factors was when I started an organization, the Succeed and Elevate organization, where we help small business owners to overcome burnout. We started out that company trying to help give them information. And based on what we were experiencing from feedback from so many people, it just confirmed and realigned with my bigger purpose that people are feeling overwhelmed and looking for a space to feel safe, seen, and supported, because so many small business owners were talking about how alone they felt and how isolated they felt. And over again, I'm hearing people talk about these problems that they're dealing with in business, and they felt like it was just them. And it just wasn't the truth. And so, anyway, that was the moment where I knew a pivot was necessary. And it took me a while to get here, but here I am. Right. And so, here we are. So, here are three takeaways that I want you to have from this as I wrap up this conversation. One, I want you to practice trusting your intuition and your connection to purpose. There are so many things and factors in this world that are keeping us from trusting our own gut and intuition. And I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the answers, that it is your job to manage and filter your body enough to where the right answers can come through, how you can regulate your emotions, pay attention to what you're putting into yourself, what you're listening to, what you're seeing, what you're saying, what you're hearing, to monitor and filter what goes into your body so that you can be clear enough to get the answers that you need in life. It is a work. You don't just have the answers if you got a lot of junk going in all the time. It's going to be mixed up with all of that, and you might not get the right answer, or the answer might not come through as clear. But to start to manage what type of things you're listening to, what type of things you're saying out with your mouth, what type of things you're seeing, and what type of things you are feeling, even, which is uber important. But that's another podcast. So begin to practice trusting your intuition and your gut, clearing up and making space for that. I want you to begin to look for patterns in your life, not just what people are coming to you for, but look for reoccurring patterns, because, man, honestly, this world is so magical. Like, miracles aren't just reserved for religious spaces. Like, miracles happen every day when you wake up in your bed and are breathing, right? Miracles happen every day when the sun is rising and photosynthesis is happening and trees are providing us with air, right? Miracles happen every single day in the most minor ways, and they're not minor at all. So practice paying attention to the reoccurring patterns in your life, because God is always speaking to us. This world is always speaking to us. There's always messages coming through, and you get to decide whether you believe it or not, whether you want to chop it up to being just a coincidence or something that's not worth recognizing or paying attention to, or whether you want to absorb it as a sign and a message to you. Okay. So pay attention to patterns in your life. And then the last one is to remind yourself that where you are in life is okay. Okay. That where you are in life at this moment is okay. To be patient and kind with yourself without guilt, to give yourself some grace, and to say that what it is right now is okay. Let that inner voice be patient and kind to the child in you, to the person in you. Be kind to yourself so that you can grow and heal from a place of comfort and peace. If you don't have somebody to hug you and hold on to you at night, buy a weighted blanket, okay? Be caring and loving and comforting to yourself. If you don't have someone to run you a bath water, to run your bath water a bath and put bubbles and all that cute stuff in it, do it for yourself, okay? If you don't have someone to rub on your feet and legs, rub on your own legs. Fix yourself something fancy in a cute way and just cater to yourself, okay? So be kind with wherever you are in life, whatever your situation is. Just know that the first step is being okay with it and accepting where you are. And then the next step is growing from that space. Okay. So remind yourself that where you are in life is okay. And life is anything but, a straight line. Like nothing is straight on about life. And so there are turns and zigs and zags. And so just know that we're all out here figuring it out. Okay. Here's my book recommendation. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. And I want you to, if you love this podcast, first, before I give you this book recommendation, I want you to, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, and share this with a friend. If you're watching or listening on Apple or Spotify or any other place where you listen to your podcast, please subscribe and also share this with a friend. I would love for you to give me some feedback so you can follow me on all social media platforms. My name is Miranda Joyner, Maranda Joiner, on all social media platforms. You can connect to me there. Send me a message, send me a DM. I would love to hear from you. Here's my book recommendation before we wrap up this episode. Thank you for rocking with me. I would love to know your thoughts about where you are when it comes to pivoting in your life, or if you have any moments where you're like, man, that really resonated with me, or I didn't agree with that. Here's my thoughts and opinions. I would love that too. I just love a good conversation, a good back and forth about anything in the most healthy way. This is the book recommendation. It's called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. It is a really good book. A friend of mine recommended it to me, and it is a great book to help fuel, right? To help you hear or read and see, to feed your spirit about how little things in just the blink of an eye can change the trajectory of our lives. How little moments, little tipping points, and little things in life can happen that can alter how we show up in this world. And I think it's a beautiful reminder to just be guided and be open to the shifts without having too much anxiety, too much stress, or trying to control too much. So my hope is that as you're listening to this, that this was helpful in helping you to release that need to feel like you have to control everything, or that you have to be super perfect in how you show up in this world. And just to know that it's okay to figure it out and get messy. Because the only way you're going to get better, not perfect, but the only way you're going to get better at anything is if you get messy first. And so I want to encourage you to just start the process, shift, get messy and ugly so that you can improve and we can all grow together. Thanks for tuning in to A Lot Alike. I will see you on the next episode. Hey, A Lot Alike is recorded at KD Creative Arts Media Studio in Jackson, Mississippi. If you're interested in taking your video and audio quality to the next level, reach out to the people here at KD Creative Arts Media Studio. And if you want to grow and monetize your podcast and take it to the next level, this is the place to be. Visit kdcreativearts.com today.